So is counting calories and getting into a caloric deficit the best way to lose weight? In my opinion, I completely disagree. And the main reason why I disagree is because it does not address the root cause of the actual problem. And the two main things that people adhere to when validating their reasoning for counting calories is the energy balance equation, number one, and number two is the First Law of Thermodynamics. The best study to reference when disproving a calorie restrictive diet is a study done by the New England Journal of Medicine, where they got 50 obese participants and put them on a calorie restrictive diet for a little bit over a year, about 62 weeks. And they measured their insulin, their peptide YY, their leptin, and their ghrelin hormones. Insulin is mainly responsible for storing fat in the body in the form of glucose or sugar. Leptin and peptide YY are mainly responsible for satiety, basically making you feel full, and ghrelin is responsible for stimulating hunger. And what they found at the end of the 62-week study is that their ghrelin went up, and their peptide YY and their leptin hormones went down. And even more surprisingly, their basal metabolic rate went down as well, by about 400 calories a day. So they were left hungrier and less satiated after a year of doing this diet, and their basal metabolic rate went down. And your basal metabolic rate is basically the number of calories you burn every single day to sustain basic function. And usually people that adhere to a calorie restrictive diet or count any of their calories think that their basal metabolic rate is always going to be at this number 2000. And in this study, it clearly disproves that, because the body saw less energy coming in, so it needed to store more, so it burned less fuel. It was a natural reaction. And this study clearly disproves the whole ideology of energy expenditure working for weight loss, because just being in a calorie restrictive state is not enough. If anything, it's going to work against you because your metabolic rate is going to go down. If anything, you would want your metabolic rate to go up. And it makes sense, because if less fuel is coming in, the body is going to store more, so therefore the metabolic rate will go down. And the opposite is true as well. If more fuel is coming in, then the body will decide to burn more. Therefore, less fuel will be stored and the metabolic rate will go up. Basically, what the energy balance equation is the equation of energy in versus energy out. And in order to get into a caloric deficit, you want more energy coming out versus in. And that's really where the saying, move more and eat less, comes from. If you're eating less energy is coming in, and if you're moving more, you're expending more energy, therefore you are in a caloric deficit and you are going to lose weight. And the reason why this is flawed is because it does not address exactly where the energy is going and what is being done with that specific energy. And the same thing can be applied to the first law of thermodynamics. This law states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. And although that law of physics is 100% true, it cannot be applied to human physiology, especially the human metabolism. And it does not address exactly where that energy is going once again, and much more specifically, what is being done with that energy. There's a multitude of different actions that can be taken with energy that comes into the body. If carbohydrates come in, it could be spiked with insulin, or it could be regulated by a satiety hormone. So many different things can happen. So it really all depends on the implications of the food, and more specifically, the hormonal implications. Carbohydrates, for example, your insulin may go up and may stay elevated for a long period of time depending on what type of carbohydrate it is. If it's processed food like Doritos, your insulin is going to stay elevated for a very long period of time because it's very sensitive to blood glucose spikes. If you take, let's say, a carbohydrate in the form of asparagus, for example, your insulin may go up, but it's not going to stay up for a long period of time. So the first law of thermodynamics, although it's completely true that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it does not follow through with what exactly happens with that energy. There are so many different things that can be done with that energy depending on the hormonal reactions to that energy. And a great example of this is comparing 200 calories of a brownie versus 200 calories of steak. So if you compare these two foods from a physiological standpoint, the implications hormonally are going to be completely different. So if you get 200 calories of a brownie, if you're just looking at calories in comparison to steak, 200 calories of steak versus 200 calories of a brownie is going to be equally as fattening. And obviously that is not true at all. A brownie is full of processed carbohydrates and refined sugars. That's going to spike your insulin for a very long time and is most likely going to store fat if you are an unhealthy individual. Now, if you are going to eat steak, yes, your insulin may go up because of the protein content, but it's not going to stay elevated for a long period of time, especially in comparison to a brownie. A brownie, your insulin is definitely going to be elevated for way too long. When everyone looks at a certain number of calories, they always think that's the end-all be-all, and that's why it's too simplistic. You know, if you get 200 calories of an unhealthy food and you compare it to 200 calories of a healthy food like I just did, if the counting calories paradigm is true, then those two foods are going to be equally as fattening. And that is clearly not the case. So the take-home point here is that a calorie is not a calorie. It's all about the source of those calories and where they came from. The hormonal implications of those calories are far more important than just the calories themselves. So if counting calories doesn't work, then what does work? Well, I'll tell you these 3 questions that I always ask myself before I eat anything has really helped me in benefiting my health, and it has helped other people lose weight that I've worked with. So the first question that I always ask myself is it a whole food? A chicken is a great example of this because it's a completely natural food source. If you get something that has a paragraph of ingredients like a protein shake, or especially some of the flavored protein shakes from ISO or any of those other big brands, they're going to have a paragraph of ingredients, a multitude of different ingredients and additives that they add into the protein powder to make it taste good. So that's a great example of what is not a whole food. But chicken is, because it came from the planet. And that leads into my second question. Was it made on the planet, or was it made in a manufacturing plant? And this is a great question to eliminate any possible processed foods from your diet. If you look at, let's say, a cookie, for example, it usually has some bleached wheat flour, added sugars, all sorts of fake things that were made by humans and not made on the planet. But if you use our example from before, just a chicken that had a good life and ate grass, and if it was naturally raised, then that's a great example of a food that was made on the planet. So the third question that I always ask myself is, what are the hormonal implications of eating whatever it is I'm about to eat? So if I eat asparagus, for example, the hormonal implications of that food are definitely going to be in my favor, because it's not going to spike my insulin and keep it elevated for a long period of time. And it's from the planet, and it's a whole food. It's a great option for eating something healthy in comparison to eating something like Oreos, which is going to have horrible hormonal implications on your body. And it is loaded with many different additives to make it more marketable and to make it more addicting, so you buy it again. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you liked it, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.